The china plate clattered against the table as Eliza's hands began to tremble uncontrollably. Her eyes fixed on the faded photograph the elderly couple had casually placed beside their coffee cups. In the warm glow of the sunset streaming through the diner windows, her mind raced through fragments of childhood memories she had long buried, a woman's gentle laugh, the scent of lavender, and the inexplicable emptiness that had followed her through 27 years of wondering why she had been left behind at the children's home with nothing but a small silver locket. Time seemed to freeze as the elderly woman's eyes met Eliza's, a flicker of recognition passing between them like electricity, neither one able to speak the words that might bridge decades of silence and unanswered questions. Could this chance encounter at a roadside diner on the outskirts of a town she'd only moved to 3 months ago somehow be the answer to the question that had haunted her entire life? What would you do if strangers walked into your life holding the missing pieces of your past? Comment below with your thoughts and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories of long-lost connections and second chances. If this touched your heart, please like and share with someone who believes in fate's mysterious ways. "I'm so sorry," Eliza stammered, kneeling to gather the shattered pieces. Her fingers trembled as she tried to focus on the task rather than the photograph that had caused her world to tilt on its axis. "No harm done, dear," the elderly woman said softly. "Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." Eliza couldn't answer. In many ways she had. Questions had defined Eliza's existence for as long as she could remember. The earliest memory she had was sitting on a thin mattress at Bright Future's children's home, asking Miss Patterson why she didn't have parents like the children in the storybooks. "Some children come to us in special ways," Miss Patterson had explained, her kind eyes unable to mask the pity Eliza would grow to resent. "Your mother brought you here when you were very small. She left you this." The silver locket became Eliza's most precious possession. Inside was a fragment of a photograph, just enough to see part of a woman's face and shoulder. For years, Eliza had fallen asleep pressing it against her heart, inventing stories about the woman who had given her life, then given her away. By 16, Eliza had exhausted the patience of 5 foster families and developed a protective shell that kept people at arm's length. The questions evolved from childish, "Why doesn't my mommy want me?" to more practical concerns. Who am I? Where do I come from? Is anyone looking for me? At 18, newly emancipated from the system, she tried to find answers. She'd scraped together money for a private investigator, only to be told the trail was too cold. The children's home records showed little a woman had dropped off a 3-year-old girl named Eliza, claiming financial hardship, and disappeared. The disappointment had taught Eliza a valuable lesson. Hope was dangerous. Better to expect nothing and be pleasantly surprised than to yearn for something and face the crushing weight of yet another letdown. For the next 9 years, she drifted from town to town, taking waitressing jobs that paid cash, making superficial friendships that wouldn't hurt when she inevitably moved on. 3 months ago, she'd landed in Millfield after her car broke down. The repair costs emptied her savings, and Sunny's roadside diner had a help wanted sign. It was meant to be temporary, just like everything else in her life. "Miss, do you need to sit down?" The elderly man's voice cut through her thoughts. He'd risen from the booth, concern etched on his weathered face. "I'm fine," Eliza managed, depositing the broken pieces in her apron pocket. "Just clumsy today." "You seemed quite affected by our photo," the woman observed gently. "May I ask why?" Eliza glanced around the nearly empty diner. Carol, the other server, was watching curiously from behind the counter. Double quotes Eliza started, unsure what to say. How could she explain a reaction she herself didn't understand? "It reminded me of someone, that's all." The young woman in the picture? The elderly woman pressed, her voice trembling slightly. You recognized her? I don't know, Eliza admitted. Maybe I should get back to work. Of course, dear, the woman said, but her eyes, kind blue eyes that seemed oddly familiar, remained fixed on Eliza's face. We're in no hurry. We'll be here a while longer if you'd like to talk. Eliza nodded numbly and retreated to the kitchen, heart hammering in her chest. She leaned against the cool metal prep table, drawing deep breaths. What's going on? Carol asked, following her. You look like you've seen a ghost. Nothing, Eliza replied automatically. Then, changing her mind, actually, do you mind if I take my break now? Carol's expression softened. In the 3 months they'd worked together, Eliza had never asked for a favor. Sure, honey. Take your time. I'll cover your tables. Eliza slipped into the cramped employee break room, her fingers already reaching for the chain around her neck. She needed to confirm what she thought she'd seen. She needed to know if the face in that elderly couple's photograph matched the fragment she'd carried her entire life. She needed to know if she'd just served coffee to the parents she never thought she'd find. The break room was empty. Just a wobbly table and a few folding chairs crammed into what had once been a storage closet. Eliza sank onto a chair and with trembling fingers unclasped the delicate silver chain from around her neck. The locket was small, tarnished from years of constant wear. Its oval shape fit perfectly in her palm, warming to her touch as it always had. Eliza traced the faint floral engraving with her thumb before carefully prying it open. Inside, protected by a thin layer of cloudy plastic, was the fragment of a photograph. She'd memorized every detail. A woman's face partially visible, smiling with eyes the same shade of green as Eliza's own. Behind her shoulder, the blurry edge of what might be a man's shirt. The photo was torn jaggedly, as if ripped in haste. Eliza closed her eyes, remembering the photograph on the couple's table. It showed a young family in a garden, a handsome, dark-haired man, a pretty woman with auburn hair, and a small child with a stuffed rabbit. The child's face had triggered something in Eliza's memory, but it was the woman who had made her hands shake. The same smile, the same eyes. It can't be, Eliza whispered to the empty room. It's impossible, but was it? How many times had she imagined this exact scenario? Countless daydreams of bumping into her mother at a grocery store or passing her father on the street. The fantasy had sustained her through lonely nights in foster care, though as an adult, she'd recognized it as childish wishful thinking, yet here she was, 24 years later, possibly sharing the same space as the people who had created her, then discarded her. A sudden wave of anger replaced her shock. If these were her parents, why had they given her up? What right did they have to appear? Now, when she'd finally accepted her solitary existence, the door creaked open and Carol peeked in. You okay, honey? You've been in here 15 minutes. Eliza quickly closed the locket and slipped it back around her neck. I'm fine. Just needed a moment. Carol stepped inside, closing the door behind her. At 53, she had the weathered beauty of someone who'd faced life's hardships head-on and emerged victorious. In 3 months, she was the closest thing to a friend Eliza had made. Those people are still out there, Carol said. The old man asked if you were coming back. Eliza's heart skipped. What did you tell them? That you weren't feeling well. The woman seemed real concerned. Carol studied Eliza's face. Want to tell me what's going on? I've never seen you rattled like this. Eliza hesitated. She'd survived by keeping people at a distance, sharing nothing of consequence. But something about this moment felt pivotal, as if her usual rules no longer applied. I think, she began, then swallowed hard. I think they might be my parents. Instead of dismissing the idea as crazy, Carol nodded slowly. The way that woman was looking at you, I wondered if it was something like that. I have this. Eliza pulled out the locket again, opening it to show Carol. It's all I have from my birth family. And that woman in their photograph, she looks like this. Like me. Carol squinted at the tiny photo fragment. Hard to be sure from this little piece, but I see what you mean about the resemblance. I was left at a children's home when I was 3, Eliza explained. I barely remember anything before that. Just ... Feelings, impressions, the scent of lavender. A garden. Maybe. And you've never tried to find them? I tried when I was 18. Hit nothing but dead ends. Eliza tucked the locket back under her uniform. What should I do, Carol? The older woman squeezed Eliza's shoulder. If it were me, I'd want to know the truth, good or bad. But that's just me. Question is, what do you want? What did she want? Eliza had spent so long suppressing her desires that the question felt foreign. I want answers, she finally said. But I'm scared of what they might be. Carol nodded. That's fair. But they're still sitting there, and I don't think they're leaving until they talk to you. Table 4 is all yours when you're ready. After Carol left, Eliza stood before the small mirror hanging on the wall. She straightened her uniform, tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear, and took a deep breath. 27 years of questions had led to this moment. Whatever happened next would change everything for better or worse. She'd spent her life preparing for disappointment, building walls to protect herself from exactly this scenario, but she hadn't anticipated the flicker of hope that now burned in her chest. Fragile but undeniable, Eliza squared her shoulders and headed back to the dining room toward the elderly couple waiting at table 4, and possibly toward the answers she'd been seeking her entire life. The elderly couple looked up when Eliza approached their table. The woman's eyes widened, hope and fear battling across her face. The man reached for his wife's hand, his expression more guarded. I'm sorry about earlier, Eliza said, her voice steadier than she felt. You caught me off guard. Please sit with us, the woman invited, gesturing to the empty side of the booth. If you can spare a moment. Eliza glanced toward the counter. Carol gave an encouraging nod. I have a few minutes, Eliza said, sliding into the booth. Up close, she could see the woman's eyes more clearly, the same shade of green as her own. Framed by laugh lines and a lifetime of experiences Eliza knew nothing about. I'm Margaret, the woman said. This is my husband, Warren. Eliza, she replied, though they likely knew this from her name tag. Warren nodded, his expression softening slightly. You reminded us of someone the moment you walked up to our table. Then when you saw our photo ... May I see it again? Eliza asked. Margaret hesitated, then carefully slid the photograph across the table. It was older than Eliza had initially realized. The colors faded with time, its edges worn from frequent handling. The family stood before a garden in full-bloom lavender, and roses creating a vibrant backdrop. This was taken in our backyard, Margaret explained. It was Elizabeth's 3rd birthday. Elizabeth, Eliza repeated, the name resonating through her like a bell. Our daughter, Warren said, his voice gruff with emotion. She would be 27 now, the same age as Eliza. What happened to her? Eliza asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She disappeared a few weeks after this photo was taken. We never ... We never found her. Warren put his arm around his wife's shoulders. We've spent 24 years looking. Eliza's throat tightened. She wanted to reach for her locket, to place it beside their photograph to see if the pieces matched. But caution held her back. How many times had she built up hope only to have it crushed? I'm very sorry for your loss, she said formally, pushing the photo back toward them. I can see why you might have thought, but I grew up in foster care. I was left at a children's home when I was small, Where? Warren asked sharply. Which home? Bright Futures in Oak Ridge. About 2 hours from here. The couple exchanged a glance laden with meaning. That's just across the county line from where we live then, Margaret whispered. Warren, ... Don't get ahead of yourself, Maggie, he cautioned, though his eyes never left Eliza's face. Lots of children pass through the system. Eliza nodded, grateful for his pragmatism even as it deflated her rising hopes. He's right. It's probably just a coincidence. Do you remember anything from before? Margaret asked. Anything at all? Eliza hesitated. Not really. Just feelings, impressions. I was only 3 when I was left there. The same age Elizabeth had been when she disappeared. The coincidence was too striking to ignore. I should get back to work, Eliza said, suddenly overwhelmed. My shift ends at 9. We'll wait, Margaret said quickly, then tempered her eagerness. If you'd like to talk more. Warren pulled out his wallet and extracted a business card. Or you can call. U.S. anytime. Eliza accepted the card. Warren Harris, it read, with a phone number beneath. No profession listed. I'm retired law enforcement, he explained, seeing her studying the card. Old habits die hard. I still carry cards. A police officer. Someone who would have resources, connections. Someone who would never stop searching for his missing child. I'll think about it, Eliza promised, rising from the booth. Thank you for understanding. As she walked away, she felt their eyes on her back, especially Margaret's. The weight of their hope, their years of searching, pressed against her shoulders. It would be so easy to turn around, to show them her locket, to tell them she'd been searching too, but what if she was wrong? What if this was just a cruel coincidence? Or worse, what if they rejected her once they learned more? Eliza had spent years building walls to protect herself from exactly these possibilities. She returned to her other tables, going through the motions of taking orders and delivering food, but her mind remained fixed on the elderly couple in the corner booth. They stayed until closing, nursing cups of coffee that grew cold, occasionally speaking in hushed tones, but mostly sitting in thoughtful silence. At 9 o'clock. When Eliza untied her apron, they were still there. They seemed nice, Carol observed, counting her tips at the counter. Yeah, Eliza agreed, her fingers closing around Warren's business card in her pocket. They do. You going to talk to them more? Eliza watched as Warren helped Margaret into her coat, his movements gentle and practiced. They'd had 24 years of grieving together, of searching together. 24 years that Eliza had spent alone, convincing herself she didn't need anyone. I think so, she said finally. I think I need to. She stepped from behind the counter and approached them one last time, Warren's card clutched in her hand like a lifeline. I get off work at 2 tomorrow, she told them. Maybe we could meet then? The smile that bloomed across Margaret's face. Was answer enough. Eliza's apartment sat above a hardware store on Main Street, a 1-bedroom rental she'd furnished minimally from thrift stores and yard sales. Nothing matched, nothing held sentimental value, and nothing would be difficult to leave behind. Like every place she'd lived since aging out of foster care, it was designed for a quick exit. Tonight, the apartment's impersonal nature felt especially stark. She moved restlessly through the small space, unable to settle. The encounter with Warren and Margaret Harris had left her too wired for sleep, too distracted for television, too anxious for reading. At midnight, she sat cross-legged on her bed, a shoebox open beside her. Inside were the few mementos she'd kept from her childhood, a faded report card, a birthday card from a well-meaning social worker, a small stuffed dog missing one eye, and a manila envelope containing the paperwork from her failed search for her birth parents. She emptied the envelope, spreading the documents across her comforter. The private investigator's report was frustratingly thin. Bright Futures Children's Home had recorded only that a young woman had dropped off a 3-year-old girl on October 14th, claiming financial hardship. The woman gave the child's name as Eliza, provided no last name, and left no contact information. The report included a photocopy of the sparse intake form with parent returning, checked as unlikely. Eliza had read these documents countless times, searching for clues she might have missed. Tonight, certain details stood out in sharp relief. The date October 14th was less than a month after Elizabeth Harris's 3rd birthday, according to the date on the back of Margaret's photograph. The location Bright Futures in Oak Ridge was just across the county line from where the Harrises had lived. Coincidence? Maybe. But what were the odds that Eliza would end up working in this particular diner, in this particular town, on the exact day Warren and Margaret Harris decided to stop for dinner? She unclasped her locket and laid it beside the documents. The silver caught the lamplight, gleaming against the white papers. For so long, this fragment of a photograph had been her only connection to her past. Now, she could almost see how it might fit against the family portrait Warren and Margaret carried. The face in her locket fragment and the face of Margaret as a young mother seemed to match. The partial shoulder visible behind the woman could belong to Warren. And the child, the birthday girl with the stuffed rabbit, could she be Eliza herself? Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. The screen showed an unfamiliar number. It was nearly one, hello? She answered cautiously. Eliza, it's Margaret Harris. I hope I didn't wake you. Eliza gathered the papers, returning them too. The envelope. No, I was awake. I couldn't sleep, Margaret admitted. I kept thinking about our conversation, about you. Me too, Eliza said softly. A pause stretched between them, laden with unasked questions. I know we said we'd meet tomorrow afternoon, Margaret continued, but I was wondering if you might join us for breakfast instead. Warren suggested a place called Millie's at 10. He says they have good pancakes. The invitation surprised Eliza. I can do that. I work the dinner shift tomorrow. Wonderful. Margaret's voice warmed, and Eliza, I want you to know that whatever happens, whatever we discover meeting you, has already been a gift. The words touched something deep inside Eliza, a place she'd protected from hope for so long. Thank you, she managed. I'll see you tomorrow. After they hung up, Eliza lay back on her bed, staring at the water stain on her ceiling. For 24 years, she'd lived with a question mark where her origin story should be. She'd constructed a protective shell of independence, telling herself she didn't need answers, didn't need family, didn't need roots, but the tremor in Margaret's voice, the gentle way Warren had helped his wife with her coat, the decades of devotion evident in their shared grief. It all spoke to a kind of love Eliza had never experienced. A love that persisted through loss, that never gave up searching. Could she really be their Elizabeth? And if she was, what had happened 24 years ago? Who had taken her from her family and why? Who had left her at Bright Futures with nothing but a silver locket? Sleep remained elusive. Around 4 a.m., Eliza gave up trying. She showered, dressed carefully in her nicest jeans and a green sweater that brought out her eyes, and spent extra time on her hair and makeup. No matter what happened at breakfast, this day would mark a turning point in her life. As dawn broke over the small town, Eliza stood at her window, watching the street come to life below. The hardware store owner unlocked his front door. A woman walked her dog past the bakery. A mail carrier began his rounds to everyday moments in everyday wives' lives with history. With connections, with belonging. At 9:30, Eliza picked up her purse and the manila envelope of documents. Whatever the day might bring, answers or more. Questions. Connection or disappointment, she was finally ready to face her past up breakfast at Millie's progressed, from awkward to cautiously hopeful as Eliza shared what little she knew of her history. Warren asked precise, thoughtful questions while Margaret watched Eliza's every movement with barely concealed emotion. When Eliza finally produced her locket, laying it beside their photograph, the resemblance between the fragment and the complete image was undeniable. "We need to be methodical about this," Warren said, though his voice betrayed his excitement. "There are tests we can do, records we can check." "Would you be willing to come to our home?" Margaret asked. "There are things there, Elizabeth's things, that might trigger memories." And so, after breakfast, Eliza found herself following Warren's sedan in her own aging hatchback, driving through tree-lined streets to a neighborhood of well-maintained older homes. They turned onto Maple Street, where mature trees created a natural canopy over the roadway, their leaves just beginning to show hints of autumn gold. Warren pulled into the driveway of a two-story colonial with dark green shutters and a wraparound porch adorned with hanging baskets of trailing flowers. A stone path led through a front garden where late-blooming roses mingled with ornamental grasses and flowering shrubs. "Margaret's the gardener," Warren explained as they walked toward the house. "Always has been." The scent hit Eliza before she saw the plant's lavender, planted in neat rows along the edge of the porch. The fragrance triggered something deep in her memory, a sense of familiarity so strong it made her pause mid-step. "Are you all right, dear?" Margaret asked. "The lavender?" Eliza said softly. "I remember that smell." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I've always grown it. Elizabeth used to help me collect the stems for drying." Before Warren could unlock the front door, a deep woofing sounded from inside, followed by the clicking of nails on hardwood. "That's Daisy," Warren said with a slight smile. "She's harmless, just enthusiastic, especially with visitors." He opened the door to reveal a golden retriever with a graying muzzle, her tail wagging furiously. The dog immediately approached Eliza, sniffing her hands and leaning against her legs in a canine request for attention. "She likes you," Margaret observed as Eliza knelt to pet the elderly dog. "We've had her 12 years. Our second golden hour. First was named Sunny." The name sparked another fragment of memory, a yellow dog, younger and bouncier than this one, jumping into a kiddie pool while a child shrieked with laughter. "Did Sunny like water?" Eliza asked, surprising herself. Warren and Margaret exchanged a glance. "She did," Warren confirmed. "Couldn't keep her out of the sprinkler in summer." "How did you know that?" Eliza shook her head, unable to explain the flash of memory, just a feeling. The interior of the house was warm and inviting, filled with comfortable furniture and photographs covering every available surface. Most featured the same little girl at different ages from baby to toddler. Elizabeth, possibly her. "Would you like some tea?" Margaret offered. "We could sit in the sunroom. It has the best light this time of day." Eliza nodded, following them through a formal dining room into a cheerful addition at the back of the house. 3 walls of windows overlooked a spacious backyard and the most elaborate garden Eliza had ever seen. Inside, wicker furniture with floral cushions created a cozy seating area, surrounded by potted plants and more framed photographs. "This is where we spend most of our time," Warren explained, settling into a well-worn armchair. Daisy immediately curled at his feet with a contented sigh. "Especially now that we're retired." Margaret disappeared to prepare tea, leaving Eliza alone with Warren. She studied him as he gazed out at the garden. His hair had gone silver, but his posture remained straight, his movements precise. Even in retirement, he carried himself like the law enforcement officer he'd been. "You said you were in the police?" Eliza asked. Warren nodded. 30 years with the county sheriff's department. made detective after 5 years, retired as chief detective, and you investigated when Elizabeth disappeared. A shadow crossed his face. They made me step back, conflict of interest. But I conducted my own investigation alongside the official one. Never stopped, even after most people gave up hope. That must have been difficult. Hardest thing I've ever lived through, he admitted. Nearly destroyed us, our marriage, our lives. But Margaret never lost faith that we'd find Elizabeth someday. Margaret returned carrying a tray with a floral teapot and matching cups. I always knew she was out there somewhere, she said, having caught the end of their conversation. She set the tray on the coffee table and began pouring. A mother knows these things. The certainty in her voice made Eliza's heart ache. How many nights had this woman lain awake, wondering where her child was, if she was safe, if she was loved? The same nights Eliza had wondered why she had been given away, if anyone was missing her, if anyone was searching. Tell me what happened, Eliza said quietly, accepting a cup of tea, the day she disappeared. Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she passed Warren his cup. He took over the narration, his detective's precision evident in the detailed account. It was September 16th, a Tuesday. Margaret was planting fall bulbs in the front garden. Elizabeth was playing with her stuffed rabbit Hoppy on a blanket nearby. The phone rang inside the house. Margaret went to answer it, leaving Elizabeth for what couldn't have been more than 3 minutes. 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Margaret corrected softly. I timed my calls after that day over and over, trying to understand how someone could take her so quickly. When Margaret returned to the front yard, Warren continued, Elizabeth was gone. The blanket was still there. Hoppy was still there, but our daughter had vanished. The afternoon sun streamed through the sunroom windows as Margaret brought out a weathered photo album, handling it with the reverence of a sacred text. She sat beside Eliza on the wicker love seat, while Warren remained in his armchair, watchful and cautious despite his obvious hope. These are Elizabeth's first 3 years, Margaret explained, opening the album to reveal a carefully preserved collection of photographs. From the day she was born until the week before she disappeared. Eliza leaned closer, studying the images of a dark-haired infant who grew into a curious toddler with bright green eyes that matched her own. The child in the photos was always smiling, always surrounded by evidence of love, colorful birthday cakes, Christmas mornings with piles of presents, summer picnics in the backyard that was visible just beyond the sunroom windows. She was born on August 21st, Margaret said, pointing to a hospital photo of herself cradling a newborn. 7 pounds, 3 ounces. The easiest delivery, the doctor said. She just slipped right into the world, ready to explore everything. Eliza did the math silently. Her birthday, the one assigned to her at Bright Futures, was September 30th, not even close to August 21st. But then, if someone had taken her from her family, they would have changed her birthday to cover their tracks. She started walking at 10. Months, Margaret continued, turning pages to show a wobbling toddler clutching a coffee table. Talking at 14 months. Her first word was dog because of Sunny. The pages turned, each one filled with moments Eliza had no conscious memory of, yet something about them felt familiar. The backyard swing set, a kiddie pool in summer, a Christmas tree with twinkling lights. And here's her 3rd birthday, Margaret said, pointing to the original of the photograph they'd shown Eliza at the diner. Her last birthday with us. Eliza studied the image more closely now. The little girl clutched a stuffed rabbit, its fur, worn in places from constant handling. Hoppy, she murmured without thinking. Margaret froze. What did you say? Eliza looked up, startled by her own words. The rabbit. It's named Hoppy, isn't it? Warren leaned forward, his expression intense. How did you know that? I don't know, Eliza admitted. It just came out. Margaret's fingers trembled as she turned the page to another photo of Elizabeth clutching the same stuffed animal. She took copy everywhere, couldn't sleep without him. When we found him still on the blanket, but Elizabeth gone, her voice broke. Warren cleared his throat. Hoppy is still here, in Elizabeth's room. Would you like to see it? Eliza nodded, her heart racing. This was moving quickly, too quickly, perhaps, but she couldn't stop now. The fragments of memory that had been surfacing all day demanded exploration. They climbed the stairs to the second floor, passing framed school portraits of a girl who would never grow older than 3. At the end of the hallway, Margaret paused before a closed door, her hand resting on the knob. We've kept it the same, she explained. Some people thought it was unhealthy, that we should move on, but I always believed she'd come home someday. She opened the door to reveal a perfectly preserved child's bedroom, a twin bed with a ruffled lavender comforter, a white dresser with rainbow knobs, a bookshelf filled with picture books, a toy box overflowing with stuffed animals and dolls. In the center of the bed, propped against the pillow, sat a well-loved stuffed rabbit. Eliza approached it slowly, drawn by an inexplicable pull of recognition. The rabbit's fur was matted in places, one ear slightly bent, its pink nose faded to almost white. She reached for it, hesitated, then picked it up. Hello, Hoppy, she whispered. The moment she held it, something unlocked in her memory, not a complete recollection, but a sensory flashback so vivid it made her gasp. The feel of the rabbit's fur against her cheek, the scent of lavender on her pillow. A woman's voice, Margaret's voice, reading a bedtime story about a rabbit who gets lost and finds his way home. I remember this, Eliza said, her voice trembling. I remember Hoppy. Margaret pressed a hand to her mouth, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. Even Warren's stoic expression had cracked, his eyes suspiciously bright. What else? He asked gently. What else do you remember, Eliza? She closed her eyes, clutching the stuffed rabbit as she struggled to capture the wisps of memory. A song. Someone singing about a moon. Fly me to the moon, Margaret supplied, her voice breaking. I sang it every night as a lullaby. And lavender, Eliza continued, on the pillow. To help me sleep, lavender sachets, Margaret confirmed. I made them fresh every spring from the garden. Eliza opened her eyes, overwhelmed by the rush of fragmented memories. Nothing concrete enough to prove she was Elizabeth, but too specific to dismiss as coincidence. There's one more thing, she said, reaching for the chain around her neck. She unclasped it and held out the locket. I've had this my entire life. It's all I had from ... from before. Margaret took it with trembling hands, studying the worn silver oval. Warren, she whispered, it's the locket my mother gave me when Elizabeth was born. The one I wore in the hospital photo. Warren joined, them examining the locket carefully. You're sure, Maggie? I'm certain. It has the same scratch on the back where I dropped it once. And inside, she carefully opened it to reveal the photograph fragment. This is from our family portrait, the one on the mantel downstairs. She turned to Eliza, hope and fear warring in her expression. How did you get this? It was with me at Bright Futures, Eliza explained. The only thing I had from my life before. Warren took the locket, studying it with a detective's careful scrutiny. This is evidence, he said quietly. Real evidence. Along with your memories of Hoppy, the lavender, the lullaby, ... It's all pointing to one conclusion. That I'm Elizabeth, Eliza said, the possibility finally spoken aloud between them. Yes, Margaret answered, reaching for Eliza's hand. I believe, with all my heart, that you are our daughter. Warren's detective instincts had never fully retired. After the emotional discovery of the locket, he insisted on approaching the situation methodically, despite Margaret's certainty that they had found their daughter. "We need to verify everything," he explained as they gathered around the dining room table that evening. He had brought out a cardboard box labeled Elizabeth in black marker, filled with files, newspaper clippings, and reports from the original investigation. "For Eliza's sake as much as ours." "I appreciate that," Eliza said, watching him organize the documents with practiced efficiency. The afternoon had been overwhelming, the memories triggered by Elizabeth's room, the discovery that her locket matched Margaret's, the growing certainty that she had finally found where she belonged. Yet doubt still lingered at the edges of her mind, a lifetime of disappointments making her cautious. "First, we should establish timeline," Warren said, laying out a hand-drawn chart. "Elizabeth disappeared on September 16th. According to your documents, you were brought to Bright Futures on October 14th, nearly a month later." "Where was I for those weeks?" Eliza wondered aloud. "That's what we need to find out," Warren replied. "And who took you?" "And why they eventually left you at the children's home." Margaret, who had been unusually quiet, spoke up. "Does it matter?" "Why? If Eliza is our Elizabeth, and I believe she is, then all that matters is she's home now." Warren reached for his wife's hand. "It matters for closure, Maggie, and for justice." "I want to know," Eliza added softly. "I need to understand. What happened to me?" Warren nodded, turning back to his files. "The most definitive way to confirm your identity is DNA testing. I've already looked into it. There's a lab in the city that can have results in a week." "A week?" Margaret frowned. "That's so long, too." "Wait, it's actually quite fast," Warren assured her. "And in the meantime, we can pursue other avenues of investigation. The locket is compelling evidence, as are Eliza's memories of things only Elizabeth would know. But we should also request the complete files from Bright Futures. See if there's any description of the woman who dropped you off." Eliza reached for the manila envelope she'd brought with her. "I have some of those records, but they're minimal. Just the intake form, really." Warren examined the photocopy, his expression grim. "Not much to go on." "I'll call in some favors, see if we can get the complete file." "What about the original investigation?" Eliza asked. "Were there any suspects?" A shadow crossed Warren's face. "Several. A registered sex offender who had moved to the area a month before. A disgruntled former employee of mine who had made threats. A few others." He tapped a thick folder. "All were eventually cleared. The police focused on strangers," Margaret added. "Men, mostly. They never seriously considered ... Considered what?" Eliza prompted when Margaret trailed off. Warren and Margaret exchanged a glance, communicating silently in the way of long-married couples. "There was one theory I pursued that the department dismissed," Warren finally said. "I believed it might have been someone Elizabeth knew. Someone she would have gone with willingly, without crying out or struggling." "Like who?" "We had a neighbor," Margaret explained. "Martha Cunningham. Lived 3 houses down. She was ... troubled. Her daughter had died from leukemia the year before, a little girl about Elizabeth's age. After that, Martha would come over often, bringing gifts for Elizabeth, offering to babysit. She seemed fixated on her. I suggested her as a person of interest," Warren continued, "but my colleagues thought I was grasping at straws. Martha was a respected member of the community, a kindergarten teacher before her daughter's illness. Grieving, yes, but not a kidnapper. And there was no evidence connecting her to Elizabeth's disappearance." "What happened to her?" Eliza asked. "She moved away about 6 weeks after Elizabeth vanished. Said the neighborhood held too many painful memories." Warren's jaw tightened. "I always thought the timing was suspicious, but by then, The investigation had shifted focus to a serial offender operating in a neighboring state. Do you think she took me? This Martha woman? It's a theory, Warren said carefully. One I could never prove. But if she did take you because she was grieving her daughter, it might explain why she eventually brought you to a children's home. Reality may have set in, guilt, perhaps. Or she realized she couldn't care for you properly. Or she was afraid of being caught, Margaret added. Eliza tried to process this information. Do you know where she went after she moved? Warren shook his head. I tried to track her, but she seemed to vanish. Changed her name, possibly. This was before the internet made people easier to find. We should try again, Eliza suggested. With today's technology, social media, there must be ways to find her. Warren's expression brightened slightly. You're right. And I still have contacts in law enforcement who might help. Unofficially, of course. First, the DNA test, Margaret insisted. Let's confirm what I already know in my heart. Then we can find this woman and get the answers we need. Warren nodded, checking his watch. It's too late to call the lab today, but I'll make arrangements first thing tomorrow. In the meantime, he hesitated, looking between his wife and Eliza. I know this is moving quickly, but would you consider staying here tonight, Eliza? The guest room is made up, and it would give us more time to talk. The invitation surprised Eliza. Despite the emotional revelations of the day, she had assumed she would return to her apartment. Staying the night felt like a big step in acknowledgement that her life was changing irrevocably. You don't have to, Margaret added quickly, sensing her hesitation. It's just, we've lost so much time already. The naked hope in the older woman's eyes made Eliza's decision easy. I'd like that, she said. I'll need to get some things from my apartment, but I could come back. Margaret's face lit up with joy. I'll make up the guest room with fresh sheets and dinner. We should have a proper dinner together. As Margaret hurried from the room, energized by purpose, Warren offered Eliza a small smile. She's been waiting for this day for 24 years, he said quietly. We both have. Eliza nodded, the weight of their decades-long hopes settling on her shoulders. I'll be back in an hour, she promised Dot as she drove back to her apartment. Eliza realized she'd spent her entire life waiting for answers, waiting for belonging, waiting for the pieces of her identity to click into place. Perhaps the waiting was finally over. The next 2 weeks unfolded in a strange limbo as Eliza, Warren, and Margaret waited for the DNA results. Warren had made arrangements for expedited testing, but even with his law enforcement connections, the process couldn't be rushed beyond certain limits. Science takes time, he explained when Margaret grew impatient. We want accuracy, not just speed. Eliza continued working at Sunny's roadside diner, unwilling to append her life completely until they had definitive proof. Each evening after her shift, she would drive to the house on Maple Street, where Margaret waited with dinner ready, and Warren had new information to share from his unofficial investigation. On the third night, Carol cornered Eliza in the break. Room at the diner. Spill it, she demanded, arms crossed. You've been floating around here like you're walking on clouds, but with this worried look in your eyes. What's going on with those people from last week? Eliza hesitated, then decided. Carol deserved the truth. They might be my parents, she admitted. We're doing a DNA test to be sure. Carol's eyes widened. Seriously? How is that even possible? Over the next 15 minutes, Eliza shared the bare outline of the situation, Elizabeth's disappearance, the locket, the memories that had surfaced in Elizabeth's bedroom. She omitted Warren's theory about Martha Cunningham, still too uncertain about those details to discuss them. That's like something from a movie, Carol said when Eliza finished. Are you okay? This must be a lot to process. Eliza considered the question. Was she okay? The past 2 weeks had been an emotional roller coaster, hope and doubt, excitement and fear, all swirling together into a constant state of anxious anticipation. I'm cautiously optimistic, she finally said. They're wonderful people. And there's so much evidence pointing to me being their daughter. But I've spent my whole life expecting disappointment, you know? It's hard to believe this might actually work out. Carol squeezed her shoulder. Well, I'm rooting for you. And if it turns, out there are your folks. I'll expect an invitation to the family reunion party. Eliza smiled, grateful for Carol's uncomplicated support. You'll be first on the list. At the Harris home, Eliza gradually became more comfortable. Margaret gave her space, though Eliza often caught the older woman watching her with a mixture of wonder and barely contained emotion. Warren maintained his methodical approach to confirming her identity, but his initial guardedness had softened to something warmer. On the 5th day, Margaret invited Eliza into the garden. I thought you might like to help me with the lavender, she suggested. It's time to harvest the last blooms before fall really sets in. They worked side by side in the fragrant rose, Margaret demonstrating how to cut the stems at just the right angle, how to bundle them with twine, how to hang them to dry. Elizabeth used to love this, Margaret said, carefully securing a bundle. She would carry the little bundles around like dolls, talking to them. By the end of the day, she'd be covered in purple buds. Eliza could almost see it, a small dark-haired girl walking through the garden, leaving a trail of lavender behind her. The image felt like a memory, though she couldn't be certain it wasn't just her imagination, fueled by Margaret's stories. I've always been drawn to gardens, Eliza admitted. Wherever I've lived, I've tried to grow something, even if it was just a potted plant on a windowsill. Margaret smiled. It's in your blood. My mother was a gardener, and her mother before her, Elizabeth, was showing signs of the gift too before she trailed off, her expression clouding. Eliza gently changed the subject. Show me how you make the sachets. The ones you put in the pillowcases. The afternoon passed peacefully as Margaret taught Eliza to sew small pouches of linen, fill them with dried lavender, and stitch them closed. The familiar scent and the rhythmic work of their hands created a comfortable intimacy between them. Meanwhile, Warren pursued the Martha Cunningham angle with quiet determination. On the 8th day, he announced a breakthrough over dinner. I found her, he said, placing a printout on the table. Or rather, I found where she was. Martha Cunningham moved to Arizona after leaving here. Changed her last name to Westfield her mother's maiden name. Worked as a teacher there for about 15 years. Is she still there? Eliza asked, studying the document, a staff listing from an elementary school in Phoenix, dated 2005. Warren's expression turned grim. No, she's in a nursing facility in Tucson now. Early onset dementia. Has been there for the past 6 years. Margaret gasped softly. Dementia? But she'd only be in her 60s. 64, Warren confirmed. Apparently, it's a genetic form that ran in her family. Her mother had it too. Eliza felt a strange mix of emotions, disappointment that their potential answers might be locked away in a deteriorating mind, yet a surprising flicker of sympathy for the woman who might have stolen her from her family. Could we talk to her anyway? She asked. Even with dementia, she might have moments of clarity. Warren nodded. I've been thinking the same thing. I made some calls. The facility says her condition varies. Some days she's relatively lucid, others she doesn't recognize her own name. But they didn't rule out the possibility of visitors. We should go, Margaret said firmly, as soon as we get the DNA results. If they confirm what we already know, we need to understand what happened, for all our sakes. On the 12th day, Eliza was arranging silverware for the dinner rush when Carol called her to the phone. It's Warren, Carol said, handing her the receiver. Says it's important. Eliza's heart pounded as she took the call. Hello? The lab called, Warren said without preamble. The results are in. Can you come over after your shift? His tone revealed nothing, and Eliza found herself gripping the counter for support. I can get Carol to cover for me. I'll come now. The drive to Maple Street had never felt longer. Eliza's mind raced with possibilities. What if the test was negative? What if this connection she'd begun to feel with Warren and Margaret, this sense of belonging she'd started to embrace, was built on nothing but coincidence and wishful thinking? Or what if it was positive? What then? 24 years of separation couldn't be erased overnight. Who was she if not the solitary, self-sufficient Eliza who had navigated life alone? Who was Elizabeth Harris, and could she become that person? Again, as she pulled into the driveway, she saw Warren and Margaret waiting on the porch, an envelope in Warren's hand. She cut the engine but remained in the car for a moment, taking a deep breath. Whatever the results, her life had already changed. She had glimpsed what family could mean, what belonging might feel like. Whether or not her DNA matched theirs, she had discovered a part of herself in the past 2 weeks that she couldn't simply lock away again, with that realization steadying her. Eliza stepped out of the car and walked toward the two people who, in such a short time, had come to mean so much to her. Toward the truth, whatever it might be. Warren held the envelope in steady hands, but his eyes betrayed his tension as Eliza climbed the porch steps. We wanted to wait for you, he said. Whatever the results, we face them together. Margaret reached for Eliza's hand. No matter what that paper says, these past 2 weeks have been a gift. The three of them moved into the living room where Daisy greeted Eliza with her usual enthusiasm before settling at Warren's feet. Warren carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the document inside, his expression giving nothing away as he scanned the contents. The results are ... He began, then paused, taking a deep breath. Inconclusive. What? Margaret's voice cracked. With disbelief. How can they be inconclusive? Warren handed her the report. There are markers that suggest a familial relationship, but not enough for absolute certainty. The lab recommends a more comprehensive test. Eliza sat heavily on the couch, a confusing mix of emotions washing over her. Not a definitive no, but not the clear confirmation they'd hoped for either. More waiting, more uncertainty. I've already spoken to the lab director, Warren continued. The more detailed test takes longer, 3 weeks minimum, but it will give us a definitive answer. 3 more weeks, Margaret murmured, shaking her head, when we've already waited 24 years. Eliza studied their faces, Warren's careful neutrality masking disappointment, Margaret's naked frustration. What do we do in the meantime? She asked. We continue our investigation, Warren said firmly. DNA isn't the only evidence. We have the locket, your memories, the timeline. And we still need to understand what happened to Elizabeth, to you after you disappeared. He crossed to his desk and returned with a folder of newspaper clippings. I've been gathering everything published about Elizabeth's disappearance. The media coverage was extensive at first, but faded after a few months when there were no new leads. Eliza accepted the folder, opening it to find yellowing newspaper articles with headlines that sent a chill through her. Local girl 3 vanishes from front yard search for missing toddler, enters second week. Detective's daughter still missing as leads grow sealed. Articles included a photo of Elizabeth, the same one from Warren and Margaret's family portrait, and details of the investigation. Several quoted Warren directly, his desperation evident even through the formal journalistic language. The community really came together, Margaret said, looking over Eliza's shoulder at the clippings. Hundreds of volunteers searched the woods, the neighborhoods. People we'd never met showed up to help. One article from 6 months after the disappearance caught Eliza's attention. It mentioned several theories the police were pursuing, including potential connections to other child abductions in neighboring states. A sidebar listed persons of interest who had been questioned and cleared, including Martha Cunningham. It says here that Martha Cunningham was cleared, Eliza noted, showing Warren the article. He nodded grimly. Officially, yes. She had an alibi for the time of the disappearance, claimed she was at a doctor's appointment. I never found evidence to disprove it, but I always have my doubts. Why? Eliza pressed. What made you suspect her specifically? Warren and Margaret exchanged a glance. About a week before Elizabeth disappeared, Margaret began, I found Martha in Elizabeth's room. She wasn't supposed to be there. She'd come over to drop off a cake, said she needed to use the bathroom. When I went upstairs, she was sitting on Elizabeth's bed, holding Hoppy, crying. She apologized, said being around children's things made her emotional because of her daughter. I felt terrible for her. And there were other incidents, Warren added. She would bring Elizabeth presents, almost daily expensive toys, clothes. Once she brought a child-sized suitcase with a complete wardrobe inside. Said she'd bought it for her daughter before she passed away. It seemed excessive. After Elizabeth disappeared, Margaret continued, Martha was distraught almost. As much as we were. She joined the search parties, put up flyers. But then, about a month later, she suddenly announced she was moving to Arizona. Said she'd inherited a house from an aunt. I checked, Warren said. There was no aunt, no inheritance. She sold her. House here at a loss and just left. Eliza considered this information, trying to fit it into the fragmented puzzle of her past. If she did take me, why would she eventually bring me to a children's home? Why not keep me? I've wondered that for years, Warren admitted. If my theory is correct, perhaps the reality of caring for a child didn't match her fantasy. Or maybe she feared getting caught, or he hesitated. Or what? Eliza prompted. Or she began to understand the pain she'd caused us, Margaret suggested softly. Maybe guilt finally overcame her grief. Eliza returned to the newspaper clippings, searching for more mentions of Martha. The most recent article, dated a year after Elizabeth's disappearance, quoted a despondent Warren, We will never stop looking for our daughter. Elizabeth, if you're out there somewhere, know that we love you and we're waiting for you to come home. The words spoken 23 years ago, but preserved in newsprint brought tears to Eliza's eyes. She had spent her childhood believing no one wanted her, while these two people had been searching desperately, keeping her bedroom unchanged, preserving her memory in photographs and newspaper clippings, and a stuffed rabbit named Hoppy. I want to see her, Eliza said suddenly. Martha, I don't want to wait 3 more weeks for the DNA test. If she took me, if she's the reason I grew up without you, I need to know why. Warren studied her face. Are you sure? Her condition means she might not recognize you, might not remember what happened. I'm sure, Eliza said firmly. Whether or not I'm Elizabeth, and I believe I am, I need answers. We all do, Warren nodded. Decision made. I'll make arrangements. The nursing facility is in Tucson. We could drive down this weekend. All of us? Margaret asked, hope brightening her expression. All of us, Warren confirmed. It's time to face the past, whatever it holds. As they discussed logistics for the trip, Eliza felt a strange sense of peace settling over her. The inconclusive DNA test had been a disappointment, but perhaps answers lay not in science, but in the faded memories of a troubled woman in a nursing home in Arizona. For the first time in her life, Eliza wasn't facing her questions alone. Whatever they discovered in Tucson, they would face it together as a family. The trip to Tucson, was postponed when the lab called with unexpected news. They had found a way to expedite the more detailed DNA test. Warren's law enforcement connections had paid off, moving their case to priority status. 1 week, he told Eliza and Margaret over dinner. We should have definitive results in 1 week, and then we'll go to Arizona. Eliza confirmed, relief and anxiety mingling in her voice. Warren nodded, armed with certainty one way or another. That week crawled by with excruciating slowness. Eliza continued working at the diner, finding solace in the routine of taking orders and serving food while her personal life hung in limbo. Each night, she returned to the house on Maple Street, where the three of them maintained a careful optimism, sharing stories and building tentative connections while avoiding direct references to the test results that would determine their future. On Tuesday, Margaret invited Eliza to help plant fall bulbs in the garden. Tulips and daffodils now mean color in spring, she explained as they knelt in the soft earth, creating perfect little homes for the dormant bulbs. Gardening is an act of faith and patience. Eliza understood the metaphor. Like the bulbs they were planting, her own identity lay buried, waiting for the right conditions to reveal itself fully. On Thursday, Warren showed Eliza his collection of Elizabeth's artwork, crayon drawings, and finger paintings carefully preserved in acid-free folders. She was always creative, he said fondly, showing Eliza a preschooler's depiction of what might have been a dog or possibly a horse. Margaret claimed she'd be an artist someday. Eliza studied the childish scribbles, searching for any spark of memory. I used to draw all the time at Bright Futures, she admitted. The counselor said it was therapeutic. Warren carefully returned the artwork to its protective folder. What did you draw? Gardens mostly, Eliza said, and a yellow dog. I never knew why. The shared glance between Warren and Margaret spoke volumes. On Friday evening, exactly 1 week after the inconclusive results, Warren's phone rang during dinner. The table fell silent as he answered, his expression giving nothing away as he listened. I understand. Yes, thank you. He hung up and looked at Margaret and Eliza, his composure finally cracking to reveal the emotion beneath. The results are in. They're sending the report by email, but the director wanted to call personally. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs, and Warren took a deep breath. It's a match. A definitive match. You are Elizabeth Harris. You're our daughter. The words hung in the air for a moment, their weight and significance too enormous to immediately absorb. Then Margaret gave a cry that was half sob, half laughter, and reached across the table for Eliza's hands. I knew it, she said, tears streaming freely down her face. In my heart, I always knew. Warren moved around the table, his own eyes wet, and placed a hand on Eliza's shoulder. Welcome home, Elizabeth. Eliza Elizabeth sat frozen, overwhelmed by the confirmation of what she had increasingly come to believe. She was Elizabeth Harris. She had parents. She had a history, a place of belonging, an identity beyond the name assigned to her at Bright Futures. I don't know what to say, she whispered, tears blurring her vision. This feels like a dream. It's real, Margaret assured her, squeezing her hands. We found you. After all these years, you've come back to us. Warren's phone pinged with the arrival of the email. He read it quickly, then passed it to Eliza. See for yourself. The scientific language was complex, but the conclusion was unmistakable. The probability of parentage is 99.998%, indicating that Margaret and Warren Harris are the biological parents of Eliza Jane Doe. Eliza Jane Doe, the placeholder surname given to her at Bright Futures when no one knew her real identity. But she wasn't Eliza Doe anymore. She was Elizabeth Harris. What happens now? She asked, looking between Warren and Margaret, her father. And mother, the words still felt strange, even in her thoughts. Whatever you want, Warren said gently. This doesn't have to change anything immediately. We understand you've built a life as Eliza, but Margaret's hopeful expression told a different story. She clearly wanted her daughter to come home permanently, to reclaim her place in the family. I want to know everything, Eliza decided, about Elizabeth, about me, about what happened. I want to go to Arizona and confront Martha. And then double quotes, she took a deep breath. I want to come home. If that's okay, Margaret's face illuminated with joy. More than okay. It's all we've wanted for 24 years. Warren nodded, emotion making his voice rough. Your room is ready? Whenever you are. The reality of the situation gradually settled over Eliza throughout the evening. As Warren made arrangements for their trip to Tucson flights, not driving now that they had the certainty they'd been seeking, she wandered through the house, seeing it with new eyes. This wasn't just Warren and Margaret's home. It was her. Home too. These weren't just kind strangers who might be her parents. They were her parents, confirmed by science. She paused before the family portrait on the mantel. Warren, Margaret, and little Elizabeth on her 3rd birthday. That smiling child was her, standing in a garden that still bloomed outside the window, clutching a stuffed rabbit that still waited on her bed upstairs. It's a lot to process, isn't it? Warren said, finding her staring at the photographed Eliza. Nodded. I've spent my whole life wondering who I am. No, I know, but I'm not sure what it means yet. Who is Elizabeth Harris now? She's not the 3-year-old in this picture anymore. No, Warren agreed. She's a remarkable young woman who survived a terrible trauma and built a life for herself against incredible odds. A woman her parents are immensely proud of, even after just a few weeks of knowing her. The words touched something deep inside Eliza, a longing for parental approval she hadn't realized she still carried. I need to tell Carol I'm leaving the diner, she said, practical concern surfacing through the emotion. And give notice on my apartment, pack my things. No rush, Warren assured her. One step at a time, first Arizona. Then we'll figure out the rest together. Together. The word held a promise Eliza had never dared to embrace. That night, she lay awake in the guest room, soon to be her room, she supposed, until she was ready to reclaim the preserved shrine to her 3-year-old self. The certainty of the DNA test had transformed everything, making real what had been only possibility before she was Elizabeth Harris. She had been taken from her family for reasons still unknown, and after 24 years of separation, she had found her way home. Tomorrow they would fly to Arizona, seeking answers from the woman who might have stolen her childhood. But tonight, for the first time in her memory, Eliza slept under the same roof as her parents. The silver locket around her neck, now a connection to her found family, rather than a question mark from her lost one. That night, with the certainty of the DNA test settling into her bones, Elizabeth made a decision. Rather than sleeping in the guest room as she had during her previous overnight stays, she asked if she could sleep in Elizabeth's bedroom. Her bedroom? Are you? Sure, Margaret asked, unable to hide her delight at the request. We can change the bedding, make it more suitable for an adult. No, Elizabeth said. I want it exactly as it is. I wanted to see if it triggers more memories. Warren nodded his understanding. Memory is a complex thing. Being in that environment might help recover what's been buried. And so after an evening spent calling Carol with the news and making arrangements for their trip to Arizona the following day, Elizabeth found herself standing in the doorway of a child's bedroom frozen in time. The lavender bedspread, the rainbow knobs on the white dresser, the bookshelf of picture books, and Hoppy the rabbit propped against the pillow, all preserved exactly as they had been 24 years ago, waiting for a little girl who never returned until now. We'll be right down the hall if you need anything, Margaret said, hesitating in the doorway as if afraid to leave, afraid Elizabeth might vanish again. "I'll be fine," Elizabeth assured her, truly. After her parents had gone to their room, Elizabeth changed into the pajamas she'd packed during her brief stop at her apartment. The twin bed with its child-sized lavender comforter looked absurdly small for her adult frame, but she was determined that she turned off the overhead light, leaving only the small bedside lamp with its fairy-shaped shade. Then, feeling slightly foolish but compelled nonetheless, she picked up Hoppy and climbed into bed. The mattress was newer than the rest of the furniture. Warren and Margaret had explained they'd replaced it over the years, always with the same style to maintain the room's appearance. Still, as Elizabeth pulled the lavender comforter up and settled Hoppy beside her, something about the feeling was hauntingly familiar. She reached to turn off the lamp, then hesitated. A flash of something not quite memory, but deeper than imagination stopping her hand mid-dash air. Fear, darkness, a child's terror of shadows on the wall. "Nightlight," she murmured to the empty room. "I had a nightlight." Elizabeth closed her eyes, tracing the fragment. Yes, a small light shaped like a crescent moon that cast a gentle glow from the outlet near the closet. Without it, Elizabeth couldn't sleep. Opening her eyes, she glanced toward the outlet. There was no nightlight there now. Had she imagined it? She switched off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness, broken only by the faint glow of streetlights filtering through the curtains. The shadows on the wall seemed to move, shifting into threatening shapes. Another flash, a woman's voice, not Margaret's, saying, "The dark can't hurt you. Nothing can hurt you now that you're with me." Elizabeth sat up abruptly, heart racing. That voice. She knew that voice. Not from the recent past, but from the buried time before bright futures. A soft voice with a slight rasp, speaking words meant to comfort, but delivering them with an undercurrent of something unsettling. She turned the lamp back on, breathing quickly. Was that Martha Cunningham's voice? Had her mind just recovered a genuine memory of her abductor? Determined to push further, Elizabeth lay back down, clutching Hoppy to her chest as she had as a child. The stuffed rabbit's worn fur felt right against her cheek, his weight familiar in her arms. She closed her eyes again, this time deliberately seeking memories rather than letting them find her. Elizabeth. That had been her name. Not Eliza. Her parents had called her Lizzie sometimes, she remembered suddenly, and Sunshine. Her father had called her Sunshine because of her smile. More fragments surfaced, disconnected but vivid. The sound of a lawnmower on Saturday mornings, pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse, a wading pool in the backyard. Water warmed by the sun, Daisy's predecessor, Sunny, licking her face and making her giggle, her mother singing "Fly Me to the Moon" while brushing her hair, her father reading "Good Night Moon." Doing different voices for each page, Elizabeth smiled in the semi-darkness, these happy memories washing over her like gentle waves. But there were darker currents beneath. She tried to remember the day she was taken, but there was nothing, a merciful blank. Instead, she found scattered impressions of what came after, a car ride that seemed to last forever, her cheek pressed against unfamiliar upholstery, a woman telling her, "Your mommy doesn't want you anymore, but I'll be your new mommy." A small apartment with yellow walls and the constant sound of a ticking clock, being told her name was Eliza now, not Elizabeth, and she must never forget crying for her mother and being told, "She gave you away. She doesn't love you." A trip in another car, the woman crying, saying, "I can't do this anymore." Elizabeth gasped, the memories becoming more painful as they emerged from the depths of her subconscious. She sat up again, clutching Hoppy tighter, anchoring herself in the present. These weren't imagined scenarios. They were too specific, too sensory-rich to be fabrications. These were actual memories, buried for decades but preserved in some hidden corner of her mind. She had been kidnapped by a woman, almost certainly. Martha Cunningham, who had tried to replace her deceased daughter with another child. Martha had told her that her parents had given her away, had rejected her. And Elizabeth, only 3 years old, had believed her. That lie had shaped her entire life. Even after Martha had apparently regretted her actions and left her at Bright Futures, it had followed her through foster homes and into adulthood. The unshakable belief that she was unwanted, unlovable, destined to be abandoned. Elizabeth pressed her face into Hoppy's worn fur and wept for the little girl whose life had been stolen, for the parents who had searched for decades, for the woman she had become, built on a foundation of lies. She didn't hear the door open, but suddenly Margaret was there, sitting on the edge of the bed, a hand on her shoulder. "I heard you crying," she said softly. "What is it, sweetheart?" Elizabeth looked up into her mother's concerned face, the face she had forgotten for so many years, the face that had never stopped looking for her. "I remember," she whispered. "Not everything, but pieces. Martha took me. She told me you didn't want me anymore, that you'd given me away." Margaret's expression crumpled with pain and fury. "Oh, my darling, we never stopped wanting you, never stopped looking." "Not for one day. I know that now," Elizabeth said. "But she made me believe. And even after she left me at Bright Futures, I carried that belief with me, that I was unwanted, that no one would ever keep me." Warren appeared in the doorway, his face grave in the lamplight. "You heard something?" Margaret nodded. "Elizabeth is remembering. Martha told her we'd given her away." A muscle twitched in Warren's jaw, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "That explains why you never tried to tell anyone who you really were. At 3, you would have believed. What an adult told you." "I think I forgot my real name, my real life, as a way to cope," Elizabeth said. "But I never forgot the feeling of being abandoned. It shaped everything." Warren moved into the room, kneeling beside the bed to be at eye, level with his daughter. "You were never abandoned, Elizabeth. You were taken from us, and we have spent every day since trying to find you." "I know," she said, reaching for his hand. "And now you have." The 3 of them stayed there in the soft lamplight, the parents, who had never stopped searching, and the daughter who had finally been found. Elizabeth knew they would face challenges in the days ahead confronting Martha, adjusting to their new reality, rebuilding relationships strained by decades of separation. But in that moment, curled in a child's bed with Hoppy the stuffed rabbit in her arms and her parents beside her, Elizabeth Harris was finally, truly home. The Arizona sun beat down relentlessly as Warren guided their rental car through Tucson's wide streets. From the back seat, Elizabeth watched her parents' profiles, Warren focused on navigation, Margaret alternating between checking their printed directions and casting glances back at her daughter. Despite the confirmation of the DNA test and the fragments of memory that had surfaced, Elizabeth still felt a lingering sense of unreality about the situation. 24 years as Eliza had left its mark. Becoming Elizabeth would take time. The facility should be just ahead, Warren said, turning onto a palm-lined drive leading to a sprawling single-story building. Desert landscaping surrounded the complex, carefully placed cacti and rocks, rather than the lush gardens Margaret tended at home. The word still felt strange when applied to the house on Maple Street, but Elizabeth was beginning to embrace. It parked in the visitor's lot, sitting in silence for a moment after Warren cut the engine. The purpose of their journey suddenly loomed large. "Are we sure about this?" Margaret asked, her voice tight with tension. "What if she doesn't remember? Or worse, what if she does and refuses to talk to us?" "Then at least we tried," Warren replied. "We owe it to Elizabeth to try." Elizabeth nodded, grateful for their understanding of her need for answers. The night before their flight, she had spent hours in her childhood bedroom, more memories surfacing as she slept in the lavender-scented sheets. Disconnected fragments that painted a disturbing picture, Martha's initial kindness giving way to unpredictable mood swings. Days spent watching television while Martha went to work, a neighbor checking in occasionally. The gradual realization that something was wrong, that this wasn't where she belonged. The most painful memory had been Martha's final declaration before leaving her at Bright Futures. "You look too much like her." I thought it would help, but it only makes it worse. "I'm ready," Elizabeth said, opening her car door. The dry heat enveloped her immediately, so different from the mild autumn weather they'd left behind. The Desert Palms Care Center was surprisingly cheerful inside pastel walls adorned with residents' artwork. The gentle sound of a fountain in the lobby, staff members greeting them with practiced warmth. Warren handled the formalities, explaining they had an appointment to see Martha Westfield, formerly Cunningham. The receptionist checked their names against an approved visitor list. Warren had arranged everything in advance through his law enforcement contacts and directed them to a sunny solarium at the rear of the building. "Miss Westfield is having a good day," the nurse who escorted them explained. "But please understand her condition means her lucidity may come and go. Try not to overwhelm her with too much information at once." They agreed, though Elizabeth noticed the tension in her father's jaw, the way her mother's hands twisted nervously in her lap. This woman had stolen their child, destroyed their family, and now they were being asked to treat her gently. The solarium was empty except for an elderly woman in a wheelchair positioned near the windows. At first glance, Martha Cunningham, now Westfield, appeared much older than her 64 years. Her silver hair was cut in a practical bob, her thin frame lost in a floral housecoat. She was staring out at the desert landscape, apparently unaware of their arrival. "Martha," the nurse said, touching her shoulder gently, "you have visitors today." Martha turned, her movements slow but deliberate. Her gaze drifted over them without recognition at first, then sharpened suddenly as she looked at Elizabeth. "Katie," she whispered, her voice reedy with age and emotion. "Is that you, baby?" Elizabeth froze. Katie, Martha's deceased daughter, the child she had tried to replace. "No, Martha," the nurse corrected gently. "This isn't Katie. These people have come to talk to you." Martha's face fell, confusion clouding her eyes. "Of course." "Katie's gone." "My Katie's gone." Warren stepped forward, his professional demeanor firmly in place despite the emotion Elizabeth knew he must be feeling. "Mrs. Westfield, I'm Warren Harris. This is my wife, Margaret, and her daughter, Elizabeth." Martha's gaze sharpened again, moving from Warren to Margaret with growing agitation. "Harris? The detective? No, you can't be here. You're not supposed to find me." "We're not here to cause trouble," Warren said evenly. "We just want to talk." The nurse gave them a concerned look. "Perhaps I should stay." "No," Martha interrupted, suddenly more alert. "No, it's all right. I'll talk to them." She gestured to the chairs arranged near her wheelchair. "Sit, please." As they settled themselves, Martha's gaze fixed on Elizabeth. "You're not Katie," she said with surprising clarity. "You're the other girl, the one I took." Elizabeth's heart pounded. "Yes," she confirmed. "I'm Elizabeth Harris." Martha nodded slowly. "Elizabeth. I called you Eliza. I thought changing your name would make it easier for both of us." Her eyes filled with tears. "You found your parents after all this time?" "Yes," Elizabeth said again. "The DNA test confirmed it 2 days ago." "DNA," Martha mused. "They didn't have that back then. Not like now. It would have been harder to hide what I did." Warren leaned forward, his voice controlled despite the emotion visible on his face. "Why, Martha? Why did you take our daughter?" Martha's gaze drifted back to the desert view. For a moment, Elizabeth feared she had slipped away from them, lost in the fog of dementia. But then she spoke, her voice stronger than before. Katie died in June, leukemia. She was 3.5. Her thin hand moved restlessly in her lap. I couldn't bear it, the emptiness. Coming home to a silent house every day. She looked directly at Margaret. I saw you with Elizabeth in your garden. So happy you had what I'd lost. It seemed unfair. So you took her, Margaret said, her voice breaking. You stole our child because you lost yours? Martha nodded, no defense offered. I watched your house for weeks, learned your routines. When Elizabeth played outside, when you went in to answer the phone, it wasn't a random kidnapping, Warren realized aloud. It was premeditated. I told myself I could love her like Katie, Martha continued, as if she hadn't heard him, that she needed me. That you had neglected her, left her alone outside. That's not true. Margaret exclaimed. I know that now, Martha admitted. But grief makes you see things that aren't there. Believe things that aren't true. She turned to Elizabeth. I told you your parents had given you away, that they didn't want you anymore. I made you believe a terrible lie. Elizabeth nodded, tears pricking her eyes. I believed you. I was only 3. You cried for your mother every night at first, Martha said, her gaze distant with memory. I promised you'd forget eventually, and you did. The stark confession hung in the air between them, the missing piece of the puzzle they had sought for so long. Martha Cunningham had taken Elizabeth on a Tuesday afternoon while Margaret answered the phone, had driven her across the county line, renamed her, and convinced her that her parents had abandoned her, and in doing so, she had irrevocably altered the course of 4 lives. Why did you bring me to Bright Futures? Elizabeth asked, the question that had haunted her for decades, finally addressed to the one person who could answer it. Why give me up after taking me? Martha's eyes cleared, focusing on Elizabeth with surprising lucidity. You look so much like Katie, that's why I chose you. Same dark hair, same age. But as the weeks passed, the differences became painful. Your personality was different, the way you spoke, the games you wanted to play. She twisted her thin hands in her lap. And you kept asking for your real mother. So you abandoned me. Again, Elizabeth said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Martha shook her head. I realized what I'd done was wrong. Terribly wrong. I'd ruined 4 lives, yours, your parents, my own. But I was afraid to bring you back directly. Your father was a detective. I'd have gone to prison. You deserve to, Warren said quietly. Yes, Martha agreed, surprising them. I did. But I thought if I brought you to a children's home in the next county, eventually someone would discover who you were. The locket. You left me with my mother's locket, Elizabeth realized. You didn't take it away, Martha nodded. I thought it might help identify you someday. And I left your first name, just changed Elizabeth to Eliza. I told myself it was the kindest thing I could do, give you a chance to be found without condemning myself. Kindest? Margaret's voice shook with suppressed rage. You stole our daughter. Lied to her, made her believe we'd abandoned her, then left her in a system where she spent years being shuffled between foster homes. There was nothing kind about what you did. Martha's expression crumpled. I know. I've lived with that knowledge every day. It's why I never had another child, never married. I didn't deserve happiness after what I'd done. A painful silence fell. Elizabeth studied the woman who had altered the course of her life with one impulsive, selfish act. Martha Cunningham had been driven by grief, by the unimaginable pain of losing a child. It didn't excuse her actions, but it helped explain. Them, what happened after you left me at Bright Futures? Elizabeth asked. I moved to Arizona as planned. Changed my name legally to my mother's maiden name. Taught kindergarten in Phoenix for many years. A ghost of a smile crossed Martha's face. I was good with children. I helped many of them. Perhaps that was my atonement. It wasn't enough, Warren said, his professional detachment slipping to reveal the father's pain beneath. No, Martha agreed. Nothing could be. Did you ever consider contacting us? Margaret asked, telling us where Elizabeth was. Martha's gaze dropped to her hands. Many times. I followed the case in the newspapers for months, saw your pleas for information. But fear always won out, and as years passed, it seemed too late. The damage was done. Elizabeth leaned forward, forcing Martha to meet her eyes. Do you understand what you did to me? Not just taking me from my family, but making me believe they didn't want me. Do you know how that shaped my entire life? Martha's eyes filled with tears. I do. My grief doesn't excuse it. Nothing does. I grew up believing I was fundamentally unlovable, Elizabeth continued, needing to speak the truth to the woman who had created this wound. That anyone who claimed to care about me would eventually leave. I never formed real attachments. Never. Let anyone close. I've spent my entire adult life drifting from place to place, never belonging anywhere, because I believed that was my destiny. Martha wept silently, offering no defense. You didn't just take 3 years of my childhood, Elizabeth said, her voice breaking. You took my sense of self, my ability to trust, my belief that I deserved love. Warren placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder, a gesture of support that nearly undid her composure. She had parents who had never stopped loving her, never stopped searching. The contrast with the lies Martha had told her was stark and painful. I'm sorry, Martha whispered, the words pitifully inadequate against the magnitude of her actions. If I could go back, but you can't, Elizabeth interrupted. None of us can. Silence fell again, broken only by the gentle burble of the solarium fountain. Martha seemed to shrink in her wheelchair, her brief period of clarity visibly fading as exhaustion overtook her. I think that's enough for today, the nurse said gently, returning to check on her patient. Miss Westfield tires easily. Warren nodded, rising from his chair. We got what we came for. Wait, Martha said, reaching out a trembling hand toward Elizabeth. There's something else, something I kept. Elizabeth hesitated, then stepped closer to the wheelchair. In my room, Martha continued, asked the nurse, a small wooden box in my dresser. It belongs to you. The nurse nodded. I can get it, if that's all right with Miss Westfield. Please, Martha said, her voice fading. She should have it. While the nurse was gone, Martha's clarity continued to deteriorate. She looked at them with increasing confusion, asking once if they were from the school, where she used to teach. Warren and Margaret stepped back, allowing Elizabeth space to process the revelations of the past hour. The nurse returned carrying a small carved wooden box, which she handed to Elizabeth. Miss Westfield has kept this for years. She mentions it sometimes on her clear days. Elizabeth opened it carefully. Inside lay a child's silver bracelet with tiny charms, a heart, a star, a crescent moon. She recognized it immediately, though she hadn't thought of it in decades. My bracelet, she breathed. The one Grandma gave me for my 3rd birthday. Martha's gaze focused briefly. I took it off when I left you at Bright Futures. I was afraid it would identify you too easily. Another selfish act in a long list of them. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I kept it to remember what I'd done, to never let myself forget. Elizabeth closed the box, slipping it into her purse. Thank you for keeping it safe, she said formally. Martha nodded, then turned to gaze out the window again, a signal that her moment of clarity had passed completely. Will you press charges? the nurse asked quietly as she prepared to wheel Martha back to her room. Given her condition, Warren and Margaret looked to Elizabeth, silently acknowledging that this decision was hers to make. Elizabeth studied. Martha frail, elderly, her mind already half gone. What purpose would legal action serve now? The woman who had taken her was already imprisoned by her deteriorating mind, her remaining years confined to this facility. No, Elizabeth decided. Justice after all this time wouldn't undo what happened. And we have something more important to focus on now. Rebuilding, Margaret said, taking her daughter's hand. We have a second chance. We won't waste it pursuing vengeance. As they left the Desert Palms Care Center, stepping back into the harsh Arizona sunlight, Elizabeth felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time in her memory, she knew the full truth of her past. The questions that had haunted her entire life had been answered. Martha Cunningham had taken her on. A Tuesday afternoon in September, driven by grief and desperate longing for her own lost child. She had lied to a 3-year-old girl, implanting a belief of abandonment that had shaped decades of that child's life. Then, overcome by guilt or fear or both, she had left that child at a children's home with a silver locket as the only clue to her true identity. It was a painful truth, but truth nonetheless. And finally knowing it felt like the first step toward healing. The flight home from Tucson was quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts after the confrontation with Martha. Elizabeth sat by the window, watching the landscape change from desert to mountains to the familiar greenery of home. The small wooden box containing her childhood bracelet rested in her lap, a tangible connection to the little girl she had been before becoming Eliza. The enormity of what had happened, both 24 years ago and in the past few weeks, was still sinking in. She had been kidnapped by a grieving mother, raised to believe her parents had abandoned her, and then left at a children's home when her abductor couldn't maintain the charade. And now, through an incredible coincidence, she had found her way back to the family she hadn't known she was missing. The plane landed just after sunset. As they collected their luggage and headed to the parking garage, Warren broke the contemplative silence. "How are you feeling?" he asked Elizabeth. That couldn't have been easy. Elizabeth considered the question. Angry, she admitted. Sad, relieved to finally know the truth. It's a lot to process. Margaret touched her arm gently. We don't have to talk about it tonight, or tomorrow, or next week. We have time now. Time. After 24 years of separation, the concept of having time together felt like a luxury none of them had dared to imagine. The drive home was similarly quiet, the exhaustion of travel and emotional confrontation catching up with them. When Warren pulled into the driveway on Maple Street, Elizabeth felt a surprising sense of homecoming. The house with its green shutters and wraparound porch, Margaret's lavender garden now silvery in the moonlight, it all felt increasingly familiar, increasingly right. Daisy greeted them at the door with enthusiastic tail wagging, breaking the somber mood. Elizabeth knelt to pet the elderly golden retriever, finding comfort in the simple canine joy of a family's return. Are you hungry? Margaret asked, switching on lights as they moved through the house. I could make sandwiches. Actually, Elizabeth said, I think I just need some time to think. Would it be okay if I took a shower and went to bed early? Of course, Margaret assured her, though Elizabeth caught the flicker of disappointment in her mother's eyes. You're home now. You don't need to ask permission. Home. The word was becoming easier to believe. Elizabeth retreated to the guest room where her overnight bag still waited. She had yet to fully move in, still maintaining her apartment above the hardware store as a kind of safety net. But after today, after facing Martha and hearing the full truth, she felt ready to commit to this new reality, or rather to this original reality that had been stolen from her after her shower. Dressed in comfortable pajamas, Elizabeth sat cross-legged on the guest bed and opened the wooden box Martha had returned. The silver bracelet inside caught the lamplight, its tiny charms tinkling gently as she lifted it. A memory surfaced. Her grandmother Margaret's mother fastening it around her wrist on her 3rd birthday. Every charm tells a story. She had sighed. The heart is for love, the star is for wishes, and the moon is to remind you that even in darkness, there's always light. Elizabeth had worn it constantly, even to bed. Martha must have removed it when she left her at Bright Futures, recognizing it as too distinctive, too traceable. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Warren entered, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "Your mother. Thought you might like this. Chamomile with honey, the way she used to make it when—" He stopped, realizing the implication. "Well, it's how she makes it for herself when she can't sleep." Elizabeth accepted the mug gratefully. "Thank you. Both. For the tea and for today. I know facing Martha couldn't have been easy for either of you." Warren sat on the edge of the bed, his own mug cradled between his hands. "It was harder than I expected," he admitted. "For 24 years, I've imagined confronting the person who took you. In my mind, it was always some hardened criminal I could despise without complication. Not a grieving mother who made a terrible choice driven by loss." "It doesn't excuse what she did," Elizabeth said firmly. "No," Warren agreed. "It doesn't, but it makes it harder to hold on to the anger that's kept me going all these years." Elizabeth understood. Martha's actions had been inexcusable, but her motivation came from a place of profound pain that made pure hatred difficult to maintain. "2 families destroyed by one child's death," she murmured. "Katie's and ours." Warren nodded solemnly. "Grief can warp a person, make them unrecognizable even to themselves. Martha's grief over losing her daughter led her to inflict that same pain on us. And on me," Elizabeth added quietly. "She made me believe I wasn't wanted. That shaped my entire life." Warren's expression darkened. "That's the part one find hardest to forgive. Not just taking you, but poisoning your mind against us. Making you believe we'd abandon you." "I believed it completely," Elizabeth admitted. "Even when I tried to find my birth parents as a teenager, part of me was preparing for rejection. Expecting to discover I'd been given away because I wasn't good enough." Warren set his mug down and reached for her hand, his large fingers engulfing hers. "You were always good enough, Elizabeth. You were perfect. We would have moved heaven and earth to keep you, and we did try for 24 years. Tears pricked Elizabeth's eyes at the simple, heartfelt declaration. "I'm starting to understand that. It's still hard to fully believe, but I'm trying. That's all we can ask." Warren's gaze fell on the open wooden box and the silver bracelet. "Your grandmother's gift. We thought it was lost forever." "Another piece of Elizabeth coming home," she said, lifting the bracelet. "Do you think it still fits?" Warren smiled. "Only one way to find out." Elizabeth held out her wrist, and Warren carefully fastened the child-sized bracelet. It barely fit around her adult wrist, the clasp at its very last link, but it closed. "Perfect," Warren declared, just like its owner. The moment was interrupted by another knock as Margaret appeared in the doorway. "Everything okay in here?" she asked, her gaze moving between them and settling on the bracelet with a soft gasp. "You're wearing it. It still fits." "Barely," Elizabeth said, holding up her wrist to show her mother. Margaret entered the room. Sitting on Elizabeth's other side, "Mother would be so happy to know you have it again. She passed away 10 years ago, still grieving for you." "I'm sorry. I never got to see her again," Elizabeth said. "Did she ever give up hope?" "Never," Margaret assured her. "None of us did. Even on the darkest days, we believed you were out there somewhere." The 3 of them sat in companionable silence for a moment, each processing the day's revelations in their own way. Martha's confession had provided answers, but also opened new wounds, forcing them to confront the full reality of what had been stolen, not just a child from her parents, but a child's trust in the world. What happens now? Elizabeth finally asked, voicing the question that had been hovering unspoken between them. Whatever you want, Warren said. This is your home for as long as you want it to be. But we understand if you need time, space to adjust gradually. I'd like to move in properly, Elizabeth decided. Give notice on my apartment, bring my things here. Start figuring out who Elizabeth Harris is now, as an adult. Margaret's eyes filled with tears of joy. We'd love nothing more. And I should. Probably start using my real name, she continued. Though that might take some getting used to. We can help with that, Warren promised. And with the legal aspects of reclaiming your identity. Birth certificate, social security, driver's license, all of it. The practicalities of becoming Elizabeth Harris again after 24 years as Eliza Doe would be complicated. But for the first time, Elizabeth felt equal to the challenge. Meeting Martha, understanding what had happened, had provided a kind of closure she hadn't realized she needed. 2 lives had been lost the day. Martha took her life as Elizabeth and Martha's life as a respected teacher and community member. Neither could be fully recovered, but something new could be built from the ruins, something honest and real. As she sipped her chamomile tea, the silver bracelet a comforting weight on her wrist, Elizabeth felt a sense of peace settling over her. The anger toward Martha hadn't disappeared, might never disappear completely, but it no longer dominated her emotional landscape. I think I'm ready to start again, she said quietly, to become Elizabeth Harris and see where that leads. The smile that bloomed across Margaret's face was worth any uncertainty the future might hold. We're ready too, she said, reaching for her daughter's hand. We've been ready for 24 years. I can't believe you've been here 3 months and this is all you own, Carol said, sealing the last box with packing tape. She surveyed Elizabeth's apartment, now stripped of the few personal touches that had made it home. The process had taken less than 2 hours. I've always traveled light, Elizabeth explained, labeling the box kitchen, easier to leave quickly if I needed to. Carol's expression softened with understanding. And now? Now I'm not planning on leaving. The decision to fully embrace her identity as Elizabeth Harris had come gradually over the weeks following their return from Arizona. The confrontation with Martha had provided closure, allowing Elizabeth to begin healing from wounds she hadn't fully recognized. Warren had helped navigate the complex legal process of reclaiming her identity, using the DNA test results and his law enforcement connections to expedite matters. Margaret had transformed Elizabeth's childhood bedroom, removing the more juvenile elements while preserving its essential character. The lavender comforter remained, now paired with more adult bedding. The rainbow doorknob stayed, now alongside a proper desk and bookshelf. Hoppy the rabbit maintained his place of honor, though now he sat on a reading chair rather than the bed. I gave Sonny's my 2 weeks' notice yesterday, Elizabeth told Carol as they carried boxes to her car. Jim was surprisingly understanding. He's going to miss you, Carol said. We all will. You're the only server who never gets orders wrong. Elizabeth smiled, touched by the simple compliment. I'll still come by for coffee, and you're always welcome at the house. The house. It was becoming easier to think of the Colonial on Maple Street as home, to think of Warren and Margaret as dad and mom, to think of herself as Elizabeth rather than Eliza. Small adjustments that represented monumental shifts in her sense of self. After saying goodbye to Carol, Elizabeth made one final pass through the apartment, checking closets and cabinets for anything left behind. The space already felt foreign, as if it had belonged to someone else, which in a way it had. Eliza Doe had lived here. Elizabeth Harris was going home. As she drove the familiar route to Maple Street, Elizabeth reflected on the changes of the past months. Beyond the practical matters of moving and legal documentation, she had been building relationships with her parents, rediscovering shared traits and interests, creating new memories to fill the 24-year void. She and Margaret spent hours in the garden, preparing it for winter and planning spring plantings. Elizabeth had discovered she shared her mother's green thumb, finding peace in the methodical work of tending growing things. They had started a new tradition of baking together on Sunday afternoons, with Elizabeth learning family recipes passed down through generations. With Warren, the connection had developed more subtly. They shared a love of mystery novels, often discussing plots and characters over morning coffee. He had taken her to the shooting range, teaching her the proper handling of firearms, a skill he believed every woman should have. Most significantly, he had shared his case files on her disappearance, allowing her to see the depth of his decades-long search. The driveway was empty when Elizabeth arrived at the house. Though she'd texted her parents to let them know, she was bringing the last of her belongings. Using her new key still a novelty that brought a smile to her face, she let herself in, calling for Daisy, who came trotting from the sunroom to greet her. "Just this for now, girl," Elizabeth told the golden retriever, scratching behind her ears. "Want to help me unpack?" She carried her boxes upstairs to her bedroom. No longer Elizabeth's childhood room or the guest room, but simply her room. The space reflected her evolving identity. Childhood mementos alongside adult possessions, family photographs, old and new. Books that had traveled with her through years of transient living now settled on permanent shelves. As she unpacked her final belongings, Elizabeth found herself thinking about Martha Cunningham. The woman's actions had shaped her entire life, creating wounds that might never fully heal. Yet without Martha's decision to leave her at Bright Futures rather than keep her, without the silver locket she'd been allowed to keep, the reunion with her family might never have happened. The thought was complicated, uncomfortable. Elizabeth didn't forgive Martha, couldn't forgive the lies that had formed the foundation of her self-perception, but she had begun to understand the broken woman's actions as rooted in grief rather than malice. The front door opened and closed downstairs, followed by Margaret's voice. "Elizabeth, are you here?" "Upstairs," she called back. "Just finishing unpacking." Footsteps on the stairs, then Margaret appeared in the doorway, smiling. "All moved in, finally," Elizabeth confirmed. "Though it didn't take long. I never accumulated much stuff." Margaret glanced around the room, her expression a mix of happiness and lingering sadness for all they had missed. "We can change anything you don't like. The wall color, the furniture." "It's perfect," Elizabeth interrupted gently. "It feels right." Margaret's smile widened. "I'm glad. Your father's picking up dinner on his way home. A little celebration for your official moving day." "That sounds nice," Elizabeth said, placing the last of her books on the shelf. She hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about what comes next. Now that I'm settled here, now that my identity is legally restored. I've been a waitress for years because it was easy to find jobs if I needed to move quickly. But now," she trailed off, still adjusting to the idea of permanence. "Now you can choose something because you want it, not because it facilitates leaving," Margaret finished perceptively. "Any thoughts?" Elizabeth nodded. "Actually, yes. I'd like to go to college. I never had the chance before, couldn't afford it. Didn't stay in one place long enough." Margaret's eyes lit up. "That's wonderful. The community college has late enrollment for the spring semester. Or there's the university in the city, though that would be a commute." "I was thinking of starting at the community college," Elizabeth said. "Maybe studying social work or psychology." I'd like to help children in the foster system, kids who are where I was. Margaret crossed the room and pulled her daughter into a tight embrace. Your father and I will support you however we can. Financially, emotionally, whatever you need. Elizabeth returned the hug, still marveling at how natural such gestures had become after years of keeping people at a distance. Thank you for everything. As they separated, Margaret wiped away a tear. No, thank you for finding your way back to us. Elizabeth smiled, thinking of the incredible series of coincidences that had led her to Sunny's roadside diner on the exact day Warren and Margaret had stopped for dinner. I think we found each other. Downstairs, the front door opened again. Warren, returning with dinner. As Margaret went to greet him, Elizabeth took one final look around her room at the past and present merged into something new and hopeful. Eliza Doe, with her solitary existence and careful emotional distance, was fading. Elizabeth Harris, with her family and future, was emerging. For the first time in her memory, she was exactly where she belonged. Winter settled over the town, transforming Margaret's garden into a landscape of crystal-frosted lavender stalks and snow-dusted rosebush. Elizabeth had enrolled in the community college for the spring semester, her application strengthened by a glowing recommendation from Warren's friend in the psychology department. Life had developed a comfortable rhythm morning coffee with her parents. Afternoon shifts at Sunny's diner, reduced to part-time as she prepared for school. Evenings spent reading or watching movies as a family. The approaching holidays brought both anticipation and melancholy. This would be Elizabeth's first Christmas with her parents since she was 2 years old, a joyous occasion, but also a reminder of all the celebrations they had missed. 24 Christmases, Margaret had murmured one evening as they decorated the tree. Hanging ornaments marked with years Elizabeth had never seen. 24 birthdays. So many milestones. But not this one, Elizabeth had reminded her. Gently, we have this one together. Now, a week before Christmas, Elizabeth sat at the dining room table surrounded by wrapping paper and ribbons, trying to find the perfect way to present the gifts she'd carefully selected for her parents. The silver bracelet her grandmother had given her, the one Martha had kept and finally returned, glinted on her wrist. A constant reminder of her journey home. Warren entered from his study, carrying a mug of coffee and a small, worn notebook. Need any help with that? Elizabeth laughed. Dad, you're terrible at wrapping. Mom already warned me. He smiled at the easy use of Dad, a term that had gradually replaced Warren, as Elizabeth grew more comfortable with her reclaimed identity. Fair enough. I'll just keep you company then. He settled into a chair, sipping his coffee and watching her work. Since her return, Warren had developed a habit of simply observing her at times, as if reassuring himself that she was really there. Elizabeth had come to understand this was his way of making up for lost time, memorizing the adult daughter he hadn't been able to watch grow up. Actually, he said after a moment, I have something to show you. I've been waiting for the right time. Elizabeth set aside the half-wrapped scarf she'd bought for Margaret. What is it? Warren opened the notebook, revealing it was actually a small photo album. Your mother doesn't know I kept this. It was too painful for her to see, but I couldn't bring myself to put it away with the other Elizabeth things. He slid it across the table. On the first page was a photograph of Margaret, much younger, holding a tiny infant wrapped in a hospital blanket. Around her neck was a silver locket, the same one Elizabeth still wore every day. Your birth, Warren explained unnecessarily. And the locket. Your grandmother gave it to your mother the day you were born. It was a tradition in her family, a locket for the mother of a daughter to eventually be passed down. Elizabeth touched the image gently. She gave it to me on my 3rd birthday. I remember that now. Warren nodded. You were so proud of it. kept showing everyone, opening and closing it to see the picture inside. Elizabeth's fingers moved to the locket around her neck, the familiar way to comfort. She opened it to reveal the fragment of photograph she'd carried her entire life, the partial image of Margaret's face. The original photograph was a family portrait, she said. You told me that first day at the diner. Yes. Warren turned a page in the album to show a copy of the complete image, the same one that had caused Elizabeth's hands to shake when the elderly couple had placed it on the table at Sonny's diner. This is it. Elizabeth studied it carefully. Margaret stood in the garden, a younger Warren beside her, and between them, holding each of their hands, a smiling dark-haired child. The fragment in her locket showed only Margaret's face and shoulder. Martha must have torn it when she put it in the locket, Elizabeth mused. Remove the parts showing you and me, leaving just Mom. Warren's expression darkened slightly at the mention of Martha, but he nodded. That would make sense. She wanted you to forget us, but perhaps couldn't bring herself to take away your only connection to your mother. A thought occurred to Elizabeth. What happened to the rest of the photograph? The torn pieces? Warren's eyes met hers. That's what I wanted to show you. He turned another page and the album there, carefully preserved behind plastic, was a torn photograph fragment, the exact size and shape to match the piece in Elizabeth's locket. It showed Warren and little Elizabeth, their image neatly severed from Margaret's. You kept it, Elizabeth whispered. Your mother kept it, Warren corrected. When we found your locket was missing too, she became convinced the two were connected. That whoever took you had torn our family portrait literally as well as figuratively. She kept this piece, believing that someday it would be reunited with yours. Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears, and she was right. Warren nodded, his own eyes suspiciously bright. She's always had more faith than I have. I believed we'd find you, but through investigation, evidence, procedure, she believed the universe wouldn't keep a family apart forever. The universe with some help from coincidence, Elizabeth said, thinking of the seemingly random events that had led her to Sonny's diner and her parents to that specific booth on that specific evening. I've been a detective too long to believe in coincidence, Warren replied with a small smile. I prefer to think of it as destiny. Elizabeth carefully removed the locket from around her neck, a rare occurrence, as she had worn it constantly since childhood. Opening it, she gently extracted the photograph fragment, handling it with reverence. Would you get Mom? She asked softly. I think she should be here for this. Warren nodded and left the room, returning moments later with Margaret, who looked concerned. Is everything all right? She asked. Elizabeth smiled. More than all right. Dad just showed me something I think you've been waiting for. She held up her fragment of the photograph. For 24 years, I carried this piece of our family, and for 24 years, you kept the rest. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening as she realized what was happening. Warren, you showed her? He nodded. It seemed like time. Margaret moved quickly to a small secretary desk in the corner of the dining room, opening a drawer and removing a small velvet pouch. From it, she carefully extracted the matching photograph, fragment Elizabeth had just seen in the album. I kept it close, she explained, her voice thick with emotion. A promise to myself that our family would be whole again someday. Elizabeth held out her piece. Shall we? With trembling hands, Margaret brought her fragment to the table. Carefully, the two women aligned the torn edges, Margaret's piece showing Warren and little Elizabeth. Elizabeth's piece showing Margaret. They fit together perfectly, the family portrait restored after 24 years. The locket was never meant to hold just one person, Margaret said softly. It was meant to keep the whole family close to your heart. Elizabeth nodded, understanding now why the fragment had always felt incomplete. Martha tried to separate US by tearing the photograph. But she couldn't tear apart what really matters. Warren placed a hand on each of their shoulders, the three of them gazing at the restored image, tangible proof of the family that had been broken and was now healing. "What should we do with it?" Elizabeth asked. "It seems wrong to tear it apart again, even to put it back in the locket." Margaret considered for a moment. "We could have it restored professionally, the tear lines minimized, frame it, and put a different photo in the locket," Warren suggested. "A new one. The three of us now." Elizabeth smiled at the idea. "I'd like that a lot." As they discussed how to preserve the original photograph and which new image to use in the locket, Elizabeth felt another piece of her fractured past clicking into place. The literal mending of the torn photograph paralleled the emotional mending of their family, never erasing the break that had occurred, but creating something whole and beautiful nonetheless. 6 months passed in a blur of new experiences and rediscovered connections. Elizabeth thrived in her college courses, her life experience bringing a unique perspective to her studies in psychology. She maintained her part-time position at Sonny's Diner, finding comfort in the familiar routine, even as other aspects of her life transformed. Spring had given way to summer, the garden outside the house on Maple Street now in full bloom. Elizabeth had helped Margaret plant new lavender, the fragrance a constant, comforting reminder of continuity amid change. The legal process of reclaiming her identity had finally been completed. Her driver's license, social security card, and birth certificate now all bearing the name Elizabeth Harris. The official recognition of who she had always been brought an unexpected sense of peace, as if the administrative acknowledgement had somehow made her homecoming more real. On a warm Tuesday afternoon in July, Elizabeth moved efficiently between tables at Sonny's Diner, her mind half on her work and half on the essay she needed to complete for her developmental psychology class. The lunch rush had died down, leaving only a few occupied booths and the regulars at the counter. The bell above the door jingled, and Elizabeth glanced up to see an elderly couple enter. Something about their hesitant movements, their searching gazes, triggered a sense of déjà vu. The woman clutched a large purse against her chest, while the man guided her with a gentle hand at her elbow. "Take any booth you like," Elizabeth called to them with a welcoming smile. "I'll be with you in just a moment." They chose a booth by the window, the same one, Elizabeth realized with a start, where Warren and Margaret had sat 6 months earlier. The coincidence sent a shiver of premonition down her spine. "Coffee to start?" she asked, approaching with a fresh pot. "Please," the man said, his voice weary. He was tall and distinguished despite his obvious fatigue, with silver hair and deep lines around his eyes. "Been driving all day." "Where from?" Elizabeth asked conversationally as she filled their cups. "Ohio," the woman answered, adding cream to her coffee with shaking hands. "We're looking for someone." Elizabeth's premonition strengthened. "Family?" She guessed. The couple exchanged a glance laden with both hope and heartbreak, an expression Elizabeth had seen before on Warren and Margaret's faces. "Our grandson," the man said after a moment. "We haven't seen him in 15 years. We raised him after our daughter passed," the woman explained, opening her purse and withdrawing a photograph. "Then his father came back into the picture when Jason was 12, claimed custody, and moved away. We lost track of them, but we've heard Jason might be in this area now." She held out the photograph. It showed a smiling boy of about 10, with a familiar look of mischief in his eyes. "We know it's a long shot," the man added, "but we're not getting any younger, and we'd like to see him again before." He trailed off, the implication clear. Elizabeth studied the photograph, struck by the parallels to her own story. Not identical, Jason hadn't been kidnapped, and his Father had legal rights, but the pain of separation, the years of not knowing, the desperate hope of reunion. These she understood intimately. Have you tried social media? She asked, handing back the photograph. Or a private investigator? Both, the man confirmed. The pie tracked him to this general area, but lost the trail. Said Jason might be using his father's surname now instead of ours, which complicates things. Elizabeth nodded thoughtfully. My father's a retired detective. He specializes in finding people, actually. The words came naturally now, my father no longer strange or hesitant. He might be able to help. The couple's expressions brightened with cautious hope. Really? The woman asked. Do you think he would? I know he would, Elizabeth assured them. She pulled out her phone. Let me call him. As she stepped away to make the call, Elizabeth felt a profound sense of things coming full circle. 6 months ago, she had been the lost one, the missing piece of a family puzzle. Now she could help another family find their missing piece. Warren answered on the second ring. Everything okay, sunshine? He asked, using the childhood nickname he had reclaimed. Everything's fine, Dad, Elizabeth assured him. But I'm at the diner, and there's an elderly couple here looking for their grandson. They've been searching for years. It reminded me of us. Warren understood immediately. What information do they have? Elizabeth quickly relayed what the couple had told her. They've come all this way on just the hope of finding him. I thought maybe you could help. Of course, Warren said without hesitation. I'll be there in 15 minutes. After ending the call, Elizabeth returned to the couple's table. My father's on his way. His name is Warren Harris. He was chief detective with the sheriff's department before he retired. That's very kind of you both, the woman said, tears welling in her eyes. We don't want to impose. It's not an imposition, Elizabeth assured her, feeling a surge of emotion. My parents spent 24 years looking for me. I was taken. When I was 3, and through an incredible series of events, we found each other right here in this diner 6 months ago. The couple stared at her in astonishment. You were kidnapped? The man asked. Elizabeth nodded. It's a long story, but yes. And now I've been reunited with my family. So if there's any chance we can help another family come together again. Thank you, the woman whispered, reaching across the table to squeeze Elizabeth's hand. For giving use hope. By the time Warren arrived, Elizabeth had served the couple at late lunch and learned more about their situation. She introduced them, watching with pride as her father immediately shifted into detective mode, asking precise questions and taking careful notes. I think I can help, he told them after gathering the basic information. It might take a few days, but there are resources available to me that your pie probably couldn't access. And Elizabeth is right. This is something of a specialty of mine. As Warren continued his preliminary interview, Elizabeth returned to her other tables, her heart full. The path that had brought her to this moment had been painful and circuitous, shaped by Martha Cunningham's terrible choice and the lies that had followed. But standing in Sonny's diner, the very place where her true identity had been revealed, Elizabeth felt a sense of purpose. She had never known as Eliza Dot her life had meaning beyond her own happiness now. She had a family who loved her, studies that fulfilled her, and the opportunity to help others who had experienced similar pain. When her shift ended, Warren was still deep in conversation with the couple, already making calls to former colleagues. Elizabeth hung up her apron and joined them, sliding into the booth beside her father. I've got a lead already, Warren told her, covering the phone's microphone. An address that might be the father's last known residence. Elizabeth smiled, unsurprised by his efficiency. Need any help? I'm done for the day. Warren's expression softened with paternal pride. I'd welcome it. 2 heads are better than 1. As they worked together, Elizabeth marveled at how comfortable it felt to be partnered with her father this way. She had spent so many years alone, convinced that solitude was her natural state. Now she understood that connection to family, to community, to purpose was what she had been seeking all along. Later that evening, as they sat in Margaret's garden watching the sunset paint the lavender golden, Elizabeth shared her reflections on the day's events. It felt like a sign, she told her parents. Meeting that couple in the same booth where we found each other, hearing their story that echoed ours in so many ways. Margaret nodded, pruning shears paused mid-task. Life has a way of creating these full circles. Perhaps that's why you were meant to keep working at the diner, not just for continuity during your transition, but for moments like this. I think you're right, Elizabeth agreed. And I think we're going to find their grandson, give them the same second chance we got. Warren squeezed her shoulder affectionately. With your insight and my contacts, Jason doesn't stand a chance of staying lost. They laughed together, the sound rising into the evening air along with the scent of lavender. Elizabeth closed her eyes briefly, savoring the moment, the peaceful garden, the parent she had found again, the purpose that now guided her forward. Martha Cunningham had stolen 24 years that could never be reclaimed. The wounds she'd inflicted would always be part of Elizabeth's story. But sitting between Warren and Margaret as the day faded into twilight, Elizabeth knew that what mattered most was not the time lost, but the time remaining and how they chose to use it. Tomorrow they would continue the search for Jason, extending to another family the gift of reunion that had transformed their own lives. And the next day, and the day after that, they would continue building their shared future one moment at a time. Elizabeth Harris had come home, and in doing so, she had discovered not just where she belonged, but who she was meant to be. If this story touched your heart, please remember that family connections can be lost and found in the most unexpected ways. Like and subscribe to hear more stories of reunions and second chances, and share this with someone who believes in the healing power of love and the possibilities that await when we refuse to give up hope. Because sometimes the most beautiful endings begin with a chance encounter, a faded photograph, and hands that shake with the recognition of something or someone long lost but never forgotten.